I'm Brian Stabnick. I teach AP English Literature and Composition at Miller Place High School. I've taught the course for over a decade and I love it. Now, if you saw my previous video, it was all about the narrator and point of view. And there was one important thing that I wanted you to think about in that video, and that was power. I tried to establish that the narrator certainly has power over a story, but I also encouraged you to think about how you as a reader can have power over a narrator. Well, I'm going to take that idea of power and take it one step further. And the way we're going to do that is by doing a deep dive on first person point of view. So let's get started. In today's lesson, I want you to have three important takeaways. The first is fundamental. It's probably a lesson that you've been taught since middle school, and that's pure definition. What is first person point of view? And also how to identify it. How do you know a story has it? The second is a little bit more subtle. It's seeing why the first person point of view is important. And the third is going to be slightly critical. We're going to look at the limitations of first person point of view. So we're going to get started with those definitions. This is probably not something new, but I want to just reinforce it just so it stays with you. I think the more you hear things, the better. With first person point of view, the person telling the story is a character in the story. Could be the protagonist, and that protagonist is relaying their experiences, or it could be a character on the outside. And by the outside, I don't mean removed from the story. It could just be a peripheral character, not the main one. But still, they're telling the protagonist story. The Great Gatsby is a perfect example of that. So how do you know it's first person point of view? Well, you're going to see those pronouns like I. That's going to be one of the dead giveaways. But then you'll see collective pronouns like we, me, us, all showing that the narrator is participating in the events of a story. Let's look at an example. Here's that story I was talking about. It's Cathedral, and this is the opening paragraph. And I want to read it to you so you can get a feel for it. But as I read, try to pick up on some of those key words that I mentioned in terms of identifying first person point of view. Here we go. This blind man, an old friend of my wife's, he was on his way to spend the night. His wife had died, so he was visiting the dead wife's relatives in Connecticut. He called my wife from his in-laws. Arrangements were made. He would come by train, a 5-hour trip, and my wife would meet him at the station. She hadn't seen him since she worked for him one summer in Seattle 10 years ago. But she and the blind man had kept in touch. They made tapes and mailed them back and forth. I wasn't enthusiastic about his visit. He was no one I knew, and his being blind bothered me. My idea of blindness came from the movies. In the movies, the blind moved slowly and never laughed. Sometimes they were led by seeing eye dogs. A blind man in my house was not something I looked forward to. Now, I asked you to pick up on some trigger words. Here are the ones that I highlighted that made me identify the first person point of view. I'm just going to read them to you because they're simple. My. He called my wife's from his in-laws, and my wife would meet him at the station. I wasn't enthusiastic about his visit. He was no one I knew. His being blind bothered me. My idea of blindness. And then that last sentence, a blind man in my house was not something I looked forward to. So once I've identified that and I've established this is first person point of view, I want to go back to that important idea from the previous video, and that's the idea of power. I'm going to focus on two key phrases or lines from this text. First one is that one right there. My idea of blindness came from the movies. The next one I want to look at, right there at the bottom. A blind man in my house was not something I looked forward to. This is one of the things about first person point of view is we're going to see this story only through his eyes. And in a way, there is power to that because he's controlling the story. But also at the same time, even from the beginning, from this very first paragraph, I'm beginning to pick up on a bias, that this person is biased against blind people. And I can see that by the words that he chooses. So as we talk about those things that Mr. Escobar has taught you about character and setting, with point of view, these things all merge together because I'm understanding other characters through his perspective. And in a way that gives him power because he controls the story, but it's also my job as the reader to wrestle some of that control from him. So one of the big takeaways here, and this was the second thing on our list, is the importance of the first person point of view. Why is it important? Well, it develops intimacy. And intimacy doesn't necessarily mean like an emotional connection, because reading that paragraph, I didn't feel connected to this guy at all. But I mean intimacy in the sense of closeness. I'm really getting inside his head. And that's why I love teaching this story, is right from the first paragraph, I'm getting a good sense not only of who this character is, but how he's going to narrate this story. In a way, it does give credibility because we're getting a firsthand account of what someone saw. This is almost like an eyewitness report then. And then the third thing is it expresses an opinion. I think that's what makes first person point of view so important, is you're going to see someone's opinion. That's going to be very particular. You're only going to get one character's opinion of the events, of other people, of the setting. And in a way, that's really going to shape how the story is framed. But as we look back at this text again, and you can see some of those keywords that I highlighted to point out what type of point of view we have, there's some lines that really stand out to me. And the reason why they stand out is they confirm that third main idea from our beginning slides. And that is, there are certain limitations of first person point of view. Even though it's going to be intimate, even though it's going to add credibility, there are some things that are going to limit it. And I pointed them out a little bit earlier, but I want to touch upon them again. First person point of view can be very biased, and it can really question the reliability of the narrator. Some lines that did that for me. So if we're talking about evidence from the text, when he said, "I wasn't enthusiastic about his visit," shows that he has a bias against this person. His being blind bothered me. A blind man in my house was not something I looked forward to. Now, the problem with this is, I don't know if this is an accurate representation of this blind man. I'm only seeing it through his point of view, not his wife's point of view, certainly not the blind man's point of view. And what this does is really limit how this story is going to unfold, because I'm only going to get it through one person's point of view. So if we look at the three main ideas from this video, I want you to take away some key things. And that is that first person point of view can be wonderful because it can be intimate. And it doesn't have to be intimate, just closeness. You may have a narrator that you really identify with, that this person seems to connect with you. But at the same time, we also have to be skeptical. And this is that whole idea of power that I've talked about. Our job as readers is to question what biases this person may have. And this goes back to that previous video about the picture frame that I drew for you. There are certain things that are in that frame, but a frame is limiting. We also have to consider what may be there, but just didn't fit in one person's point of view. I want to thank you for watching this video. In the next one, I'm going to break down third person point of view and share with you The Lottery. It's a short story by Shirley Jackson.